Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest developments from the front line throughout the war in Ukraine and specifically focusing on Ukraine's summer offensive, which now has officially hit a stalemate. And I say that because it has now been over a week since the Ukrainians' last advances throughout the area of their offensive. In the south of Odehiv towards Robotyne, they have not advanced since the 27th of July. In the area of Stalemate by Velike Novoselivske, they have not advanced since the 29th of July. As for the Bakhmut area, they have again here not advanced since the 29th of July. Ever since then, the Russians have recaptured parts, and that is about it. There's been no other changes. The only area where the Ukrainians have gained ground is in response to Russia's breachhead across the Serbets River here to the southwest of Svatove, and then in the area north of Uledar. Other than that, there is one small change here by Novoselivske. But generally, the Russians have had more territorial gains than the Ukrainians throughout the month of August, with them in the north by Luhansk and the Kupiansk area. They've managed to advance this a small bit here southwest of Rozhitravneve. They've managed to capture Novoselivske yesterday, which is a village that has been fought over for over half a year. Although it is very small, there's been a lot of positional battles here, and both sides have been fighting over the village for a long time, and now the Russians have captured it after half a year of fighting. There we see here by the Kremenna area, the Ukrainians made a minor advance towards Dibrova. Meanwhile, the Russians made a minor advance towards Bilorivka, and heavy fighting continues by Bilorivka. As for the Uledar area, the Russians were pushed back here next to the Dacha area from these open fields back towards Mikilske after the Ukrainians launched an attack here. Then in the central area southeast of Krasnovarivka, there has been a Russian advance here, and this is a very interesting one because the Ukrainians a few weeks back made a small advancements into the gray zone. They already had control over this area, then they made this small advance into the gray zone, and then Western media went on to say Ukraine has captured territory that hasn't been breached since 2014, like as if it was a major thing, but they captured a little patch of no man's land. In return, the Russians have now captured this whole no man's land area, as well as the trench that the Ukrainians were holding on to and have built in 2014 and then have held on to since then. So this is a real breach of the 2014 line of defense. This is the perfect personification or representation of Western hypocrisy, because we will not be seeing any Western mainstream media article about the Russian capture of this trench, although we saw a Western article about the capture of this no man's land in between the two trenches on both sides. Because this area right here is an area where there's a standoff between Russian trenches and Ukrainian trenches, or actually DPR trenches, but let's forget that for now. Russian trenches and Ukrainian trenches. And in this area, the Ukrainians made a minor advance of a few meters in no man's land, in the area between the two trenches that no one has occupied in 9 years. And then there's major articles about it. Then we see Russian advances through this no man's land, captures the Ukrainian trench, which has been Ukrainian since 2014. And then there's not going to be any sound about it. They're not going to act like it didn't happen, or they're not even going to read about it, because they don't care about Russian advances. They care about Ukrainian advances, because if you as a Western citizen sit in your home, listen to the news and hear Ukraine is advancing, your morale as to sending money and weapons to Ukraine increases. If you hear about their constant defeats militarily, you will not be inclined to do that. So Western media is not used to send truth. It is only sent to benefit whatever goal they have in mind. That's what they're being used for. And that is where I come into the picture. Take a second to think about it. This is a completely useless advance on both sides, whether that was the Ukrainians entering no man's land or even the Russians capturing this trench. In the grand scale of things, you can't even see it. And if you take a look even at the defenses around Krasnoyarivka, this is a significant or small city, large village, not sure what to call it, but there's a lot of territory to be fought over here. It is even bigger than Marinka, and Marinka has been fought over for almost a year and a half now. Going into Krasnoyarivka, which is heavily fortified, the Ukrainians have a lot of units committed to this area and all of these things. And then taking this into consideration, this is almost nothing. There's even a trench line next to it, and there's also trenches to the north of it. This is almost an insignificant advance. And I say it as such. It is an insignificant advance, whether it is the Ukrainians or the Russians taking it. But the idea that this small thing is being used for propaganda for both sides, the West and Ukraine is claiming it a major victory, that they entered no man's land between the two sides that no one has cared about for 9 years, or the Russians capturing a trench. This is not part of a big operation. It could be, because they've also advanced here in the southwest. Then it would be significant in the larger picture of things when it comes to the small city of Krasnoyarivka. In and of itself, it's completely useless, and it's only a political thing to say, here I have done something. And it's just useless. It's a useless waste of life. As we see throughout the front line, we have seen month after month after month of these small gains. Bakhmut was fought over for half a year, where it was actually fought over. Avdiivka has been fought over for so long, and yet again we see advances field by field. There is no idea behind this. This is why I think throughout the offensive, Ukraine has been pushing day by day, every single day that's been fighting here. In the past week or so, they have not made a single advancement on the whole area of their offensive. Why is that? I believe it is because they are afraid to commit. We see here in the north, the Russians have started with their small operational battles, possibly shaping the battlefield, like the Ukrainians like to call it. This alone is putting fear into Ukraine that the Russians are preparing for an offensive. If the Russians are preparing for offensive and Ukraine rise up all of their offensive power without getting their major objective, is not to cut off the supplies, just to cut off the supplies. It is not to cut the land bridge, just to cut off the land bridge. The whole point of this is to encircle a large part of Russia's army, of their equipment, of their ammunition, and take it for themselves. Eliminate the large army and take their equipment for themselves. That would allow them to then gather up all of these things that they have captured and then use them to get the rest. The issue is, if that does not succeed and they lose their offensive power, then they would be in a situation where they neither have enough power to complete their operation and encircle and so on, which would put them in a situation where their forces are stretched thin. The Russians still have all of these units and equipment and so on that wasn't encircled, therefore they can use it wherever they want. They can concentrate their own offensive, take advantage of the grinded down Ukrainian army, and now they are in a perfect situation essentially for the Russian forces. The perfect outcome for Russia is that Ukraine fully commits to this offensive and fails it. That is the perfect outcome for Russia. The perfect outcome for Ukraine is that they succeed on their offensive. And half succeeding is a failure for Ukraine, because they would have used up their offensive power. This is why they're afraid to commit, because if they commit and they fail, it's over. They do not have the forces, they do not have all of the shit they need to actually hold back the Russian forces. If they succeed while committing everything, they would have gained a major opportunity to fully push Russia out of Ukraine. And anything in between that, them not fully committing or fully committing and doing a half job, that would put somewhere in the middle of that. But essentially what we're seeing is that Ukraine has to complete this offensive, or it has to call it off. It cannot do this half-assed job, because it would put them in a terrible situation and position. This is why they're afraid to commit, because they know if they fail, they're fucked. Moving on, there's been massive missile strikes across Ukraine over the past 24 hours. This is most likely as a response to the Ukrainian side launching amphibious drones across towards the Crimean Peninsula, as well as hitting a Russian battleship, as well as a Russian tanker SIG. So these two ships were hit by Ukrainian amphibious drones, and as such, the Russians are responding with massive missile strikes, especially hitting airfields in western Ukraine, trying to prevent them from using them, as well as the things located at the airfield, such as planes and Storm Shadow missiles, to prevent them from using these Storm Shadow missiles, which would allow them to focus elsewhere on the battlefield with their anti-air defense systems, as well as other equipment they use to counter those, also generally as a response to Ukraine doing what they do. Then we have this genius strategy set by one of my followers on Telegram. This genius strategy will essentially allow Russia to disband their military. By building brushes across all of its borderlines, it'll prevent any immigrants, illegal immigrants, as well as foreign soldiers and every other thing that they are worried about to just not be able to pass through, because they have these bushes all across. According to the UK Ministry of Defense, these things are heavily slowing down Ukraine's offensive. Therefore, the Russians should just build them everywhere, and they shouldn't be worried about any invasions or anything like that. So they can end the war and everything will return to peace, because Russia will just have bushes all around. This is where the Ukrainians are falling behind, because unlike the Wagner forces, they do not use these shovel strats. So maybe they should start learning how to use the shovel. Again, as the UK Ministry of Defense said, the Russians sent the Wagner soldiers to the front with shovels. Maybe this is why, to counter the Bush strategy. We don't know. But this is all speculation. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.